Wow, I'm going to miss you so much.
Thank you. I thought for our last class before the break that we would do a little bit more about Purim, just a little bit more. Specifically, I would like to talk about Esther, Queen Esther. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be the topic of today's discussion.
Okay. Keep talking. I'm going to get a pencil and paper.
Okay. Esther is, Esther is a unique, I think, one of the unique heroines in our religious history, in our history, because she is so active. She plays such an active part in the story of Purim. In fact, the book of Esther is named after her.
Yeah.
So even that we have other, of course, we have lots of other of our foremothers who were active, who played active roles in our history, from Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, all the way down. They certainly did. But and Devorah, of course, the judge and prophetess, she's also a very active part of the religion. Of course, we as we have learned, the woman's role is super important in our daily lives and in our religious and in the culture and in terms of what a woman contributes to her home, to the learning of Torah, to the perpetuation of Torah through the generations, etc., etc. We've talked about that. But Esther is very unique in the sense that she brings about the salvation of the Jews during the Purim story. And as I mentioned, the Megillah is named for her, and so she's a little bit unique in that way. So it pays to look at this character, this person, that Queen Esther. Who was she? And what do the sages have to say about her? What kind of a person was she? What did she go through? And the sages, of course, through the Medrash and through the Gemara, talk about all of these things. What was she like? What did she look like? What qualities did she have that made her so unique and so fitting to be the savior of the Jewish people at this time, right? And what did she go through? In her experiences. We know very little from the Megillah, but the Midrash, of course, tells us much more. And we're going to talk about her today a little bit in depth. So the first thing I want to talk about is she's introduced in the Megillah. The verse says, there was a Jewish man in Shushan, the capital, whose name was Mordechai, the son of Yair, from the tribe of Benjamin. He reared Hadassah. She is Esther. That's the first introduction we have.
Okay, so who were her parents?
So I'll get to that in a minute. He said the verse says that he raised her. Mm-hmm. She was his uncle's daughter, or she was her niece. We're not exactly sure the relationship, but there was a close relationship, family.
Sorry.
Because the verse continues to say, because she did not have a father or a mother.
Stop it!
Now, to answer your question, her father died while her mother was pregnant with her, and her mother died in childbirth. So she was basically born an orphan. She was basically born an orphan. Okay. And then it continues to say that the girl was beautiful of form and appearance, and when her parents died, Mordechai adopted her as her daughter. Okay. And the Medrash says that it's possible also that he married her as well. That when it says he took her for a bas, daughter, the interpretation can also be took her for a bias, meaning for a house, meaning he made her the focus of his home. She was his wife as well. So whether or not, exactly which one happened, I'm not sure. But the explanation is either she was his adopted daughter, and or she was his wife as well. Okay, so
that's real. I never heard that before. That she might have been his wife, Mordechai's wife.
Yeah, the interpretation comes from the verse. The verse says that Mordechai took her, Esther, for a bas. Bas meaning daughter. Mm-hmm. Beis saf bas. The exegesis, the interpretation is that it could also mean not only for a bas, but a bayis, adding a yud in between, and that would mean for a house, meaning for a household, meaning that he took her for a wife. Okay, that's one interpretation. So either way, she was a part of his family. Okay, Now, so the verse tells us she had two names, Hadassah and Esther. Hadassah, she is Esther, the verse says. So there's a disagreement as to which was her given name, which she earned later. Typically, we say that Hadassah was her Hebrew name and Esther was her Persian name. And so, of course, the sages look at these names, and because we do have this a sense that there is a significance in a name, right? What is the significance in Esther's names? Okay, so Hadassah, let's look at Hadassah first. So the Talmud explains, the Midrash says, Hadassah, from the Hebrew word hadass, which means myrtle tree. Myrtle tree. A myrtle tree, by the way, is one of the plants that we use for lulav. Okay, that's one of the things we use for lulav. So the Midrash says Hadassah, from the Hebrew word hadass, is another name for Esther. The Midrash is telling us this is her second name. Now, why Hadassah? What was the significance of the name Hadassah? So myrtle leaves have a sweet smell, and they're used as a metaphor to describe righteous people. And as an example, Gemara tells us about Zechariah. There's a reference to Zechariah, the prophet, the book of Zechariah, where it says, and he was standing among the myrtles, meaning the righteous prophets Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So there is a connection made in the Torah between the myrtle, the hadass, and righteous people. Okay, why is it that the myrtle is compared to the righteous? Because the Maharsha explains that since a man is compared to a tree of the field, therefore the righteous are the sweet-smelling myrtle, the tree that has a good, pleasant smell. And to explain further, the Alshich says that a myrtle is as successful in summer as it is in winter. The comparison, the analogy would be that a tzaddik is righteous all the time, consistently righteous in summer and winter, everywhere, every place. In addition, there is another sense of this being sweet all the time, which is that the myrtle doesn't dry out in the summer or in the winter. As we said, just as the righteous do not dry up in this world and in the world to come. So they are permanently, they are totally sweet smelling in that sense, in a spiritual sense. Now going back to Esther, so why was she called Hadassah? Again, and this is from Esther Rabbah. It says, why was she called Hadassah? Because the righteous are called myrtles. The sages in the Midrash take this step further. Just as a myrtle has a sweet smell and a bitter taste, okay, so too Esther was sweet to Mordechai, the righteous Mordechai, and was adverse or bitter to the wicked Haman. Okay, so there are two sides to the myrtle plant. It has a sweet smell, but it has a bitter taste. And in the same way, Esther had a contradictory nature. She was sweet to Mordechai, she was bitter to Haman. Okay. Also, because of its sweet smell, Hadassah would also symbolize, the myrtle would also symbolize Torah knowledge, and the beauty of righteousness, which is also the Torah, is also compared itself to a sweet-smelling plant. And Esther, again, exemplified this idea of righteousness, of complete righteousness. Okay. Now, here's another interesting point about the hadass. It is, as a plant, as many plants are, as most plants are, it is green, right? The Gemara tells us that Esther also had a greenish complexion. She was green like the plant, the myrtle plant. She had a very greenish pallor to her face, to her skin.
The witch in the
like the witch in Wicked. That's the Wicked Witch of the West. So this is not an attractive, right? And it's not something we think of as a very, complexion that one would think about as attractive, right? We tend to think of paleness as being more commensurate with beauty, right? Which really makes it more miraculous that she was able to attract the King Ahasuerus. We're told that she did have a greenish pallor, but the verse says she's beautiful. She's called beautiful. In fact, she's described as one of the beauties of the world. She was one of the ultimate beauties of the world, along with Sarah and Rachel and other of our foremothers. And she was one of the ultimate beauties in our religion, in our family. So where did this beauty come from? The verse says she was beautiful of form and appearance. Yefas toar, she had a beautiful form. V'tovas mara, and she was just so comely and seemly. She's a very, very pretty girl. She, in fact, by the way, was considered but people saw her, and there was something about her that made her look beautiful. So much so, by the way, that the Medrash says that when people would see her, every person who saw her felt, this girl is of my nation, right? Because of course, in a sort of ethnocentric way, we all tend to think that our own culture or our own country is the prettiest or the nicest, just what we're used to. So when a person from Turkey would meet her, that person would think, wow, she's so beautiful, she must be a Turkish girl. When a person from Persia would meet her, they would think, wow, this girl is so beautiful, she must be Persian. So everybody wanted to claim her as their own because she was so beautiful. So where did this beauty come from? The verse says that she had on her a thread of chain. Chain is a word that it describes, is something very ineffable. Grace is really the closest definition, I think, to chain. She had a thread of grace. There was something underneath that people were able to see that came up to the surface from underneath. There's something so inherently beautiful about who this person was that it shone outward, and it made her beautiful. As I said, the rabbis include Esther among the 7 most beautiful women in the world. And she really did find favor in the eyes of everybody who met her. That's what it says. In fact, until Esther was chosen to be queen, there was no other woman who could compare with Vashti. Vashti was also pretty, had to be pretty beautiful to be the queen. But it was only when Esther came along that Achashverosh removed the pictures of Vashti in the palace and put up Esther's pictures instead. Rav Chaim Pinkus Scheinberg says an interesting thing. He notes that a lot of people have we mentioned the myrtle smelling sweet. A lot of people use the myrtle leaves for Havdalah. Again, the part of the Havdalah where we smell the sweet smelling spices. A lot of people use myrtle. Now, let's remember, what is the purpose of smelling those sweet spices during Havdalah? Anyone know?
Because your soul is so sad, it's supposed to reinvigorate you.
That's right. Our second soul that we get during Shabbos leaves us, and that leaves us with a sort of depressed feeling that Shabbos is gone and that second soul is gone. That the smelling that is supposed to reinvigorate us and give us a little, hearten us for the coming week. So the sweet smelling hadas, the myrtle, as with many other plants, I imagine, the sweetness comes out, the smell comes out only when you crush the leaves, right? When you apply pressure and you crush the leaves, then the smell comes out, right? So too, Esther's greatness, the sweetness, the beauty that she had, her inner beauty, her valor, her bravery, the qualities that we appreciate in Esther that we'll talk about a little bit later, they became manifest through her difficult life, through basically putting the squeeze on her. We're going to talk a little bit about what that difficulty was. She had a very difficult life, and because of that, in a way, when you're pushed hard, that's when your true nature comes through. And that's the idea with Esther as well. And one last thing about Esther, about Hadassah's name Hadassah, is that some of the sages take the numerical value. Now we're big on numerical value, gematria. Take the numerical value of Hadassah, which is 74, and say that was her age when she was in the palace.
You gotta be kidding.
She was either there's three thoughts about what her age was. It was either 40, 74, or 75.
Well, that's no wonder she looked green. When I don't have any makeup on, you see how greenish my skin looks? Because it used to
I don't think so.
Okay.
But
I don't
it's
think so.
interesting that Cleopatra was considered one of the beauties of the world, but she was not.
She was not what? Not
She
beautiful?
was not beautiful, no.
Mhm.
She was rather homely, but she had
A certain
Inner beauty.
regality,
Right,
probably.
right.
Yeah. It really does come through. Okay, so now let's talk about the name Esther. That's Hadassah. Now let's look at Esther. What does Esther mean? So the first thing we have to understand about the name Esther is that it comes from the Hebrew root of the word meaning to hide, hester, hidden. Okay, so how does this apply to Esther? The Rabbi Yehuda in the Talmud says, Hadassah was her name. Why then was she called Esther? Because she concealed, masteret, the facts about herself. As it says, Esther did not make known her people or her kindred. Remember, when she went to the palace, Mordechai had told her, don't reveal that you're a Jew. Don't reveal that you're a Jew. And she kept that secret for 9 years as queen. She kept that secret for a really long time. So she was able to hide that fact, and therefore the name Esther is a hint to that ability to keep secret what she needed to keep secret, what she needed to keep private. And in another way, she hid herself as well. When she went into the palace, she of course, not only did she hide to not tell Achashverosh who she was and what her nationality was, but she had to sort of hide that whole identity away from him in terms of practicing her religion, because she did continue to practice being a Jew. We'll talk about how in a few minutes. So in that way also she sort of kept that part of her secret. It was an entire lifestyle, of course, as we know. It's an entire lifestyle being Jewish, and she was able to secrete that away and keep it private and keep it hidden. We'll talk about how. Now, the Talmud says there's also a hint to Purim. I mentioned this last time, I think, in the Torah itself. The sages always like to see hints in the Torah to things to halachos and some parts of the oral law, and with this they also like to see a hint to Purim in the Torah. And the verse in the Torah that they connect to the story of Purim is where, again, we're using the root of the word Esther. Anochi, now God is speaking, and he says, Anochi Esther hister es panai. I will certainly hide my face from you. Okay. Now, this hints to the fact that the entire story of Purim, we mentioned last time as well, takes place in the Megillah. There's no mention at all of God's name. No mention whatsoever of God. No mention of God's name. So it seems as if Hashem's presence is hidden from us. Of course, we know better, as we discussed last time, and we can see the hand of God in all of the events of the Purim story. But on the surface, it looks like God is not there. We've spoken about the hiddenness of God in the world, right? This Torah is referencing this verse from the Torah, from the Chumash, Anochi Esther hister es panai, I will hide my face away from you, is a reference 2 times like the Purim story, in the time of the Purim story, like today, when because we turn away from God, we turn our face away. In other words, we don't follow the laws. God responds to us by turning his face away. And so there is a lack of awareness on a very basic level that God is working for us and with us in the world on our behalf. It's a description of hiddenness and despair. It's a very bleak outlook. It's a very bleak sort of perspective when we're not able to identify where Hashem is and why he's not helping us, seemingly helping us. In Esther's world, as I said, it was a very similar world to ours, a very materialistic world. It was very hard to see Hashem. They had been in exile for almost 70 years. And from the time of exile, that was it. There were no prophet. I mean, Esther and Mordechai were prophets, but there wasn't sort of an obvious. There weren't open miracles the way there had been in previous times. And so it is, as we mentioned last time as well, our job to seek out Hashem, but it's a really hard thing to do. So again, the name Esther, Megillas Esther, is a hint to the lack of, again, the open miracles, but also pointing to our job in this kind of time, in this time of lacking the insight, the clear insight, we have to root them out, and it's a hint to that. Now, also, there is also a reference in the name of Esther. It said that the nations of the world called Esther Esther, because the word Esther is very similar to the Persian word Istahar and the Aramaic word Sahara, which means moon. And this was a reference to her beauty. The Talmud says the nations would see her and say she is beautiful like the moon, so they called her Esther. So that's why they say that her Persian name was Esther. Another possibility, very similar in idea, is that the nations of the world called her Ashtahar, which the Yalkut Shimoni tells us is Estera, which is the Greek name for the planet Venus. Again, a reference to her beauty. And Venus is the brightest planet from our perspective. We can see it the most clearly in the sky.
Okay. Not Mars?
No,
Okay.
Venus.
Venus.
Yeah, Venus is. So again, it was a reference, a sort of nod to her beauty. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about Esther's hiddenness. I mentioned that not only did she hide her nationality from the king, but she also hid herself away in an attempt to practice a religion. She was told by Mordechai at first to keep the secret of her being a Jewess. And once she was in the palace, she actually devised, of course, she was not going to abandon her religion. She wasn't going to abandon halacha and what she needed to do. So how did she manage to do that? So it says that she devised this really ingenious way of keeping Shabbos. Okay, because obviously, I guess to a lesser extent if you're the queen, but even so, it would be kind of obvious that every seventh day on Saturday she's taking a break from doing any work. It would be rather suspicious. So she devised a really interesting plan. She hired 7 maids, and each maid would work on a specific day. So she'd have this one maid that worked every Sunday, the next maid worked every Monday, etc., etc. So she had a maid, of course, that worked on Shabbos for her as well. This way, what happened was the maids that worked for her during the week saw that she was working and doing what she needed to do. And then when they left her for Saturday, they would assume that she was doing that same work on Saturday as well. Then when the Saturday maid came and helped her, the Saturday maid saw that she was doing nothing but relaxing, not doing any avoda, not doing any work for the week. That maid would also assume that this is what Queen Esther did the rest of the week. So in that way, she was able to hide the fact that she was keeping Shabbos. Right? In addition to that, she also we're told that she observed the holidays. She avoided non-kosher food. She ate basically produce and nuts while she was in the palace. Oh, and
No.
according to the, it's all right.
It's okay.
No.
Hi. Okay. And according to the Medrash that says that she was married to Mordechai, that then she was even able, it says, to keep the laws of family purity, go to the mikveh, etc. Okay. So this privacy, this secrecy that she was able to keep up for 9 years, she kept up this facade, this view, the secrecy of hiding herself away. The Maharal points out that this is an aspect of tznius. So we've talked about tznius being, modesty is not so much hiding away something shameful, but knowing when to keep silent, knowing when to speak, keeping private things hidden away, the special private things that need to be hidden away. And Rav Hutton similarly adds that Purim is also an example of Hashem's tznius, right? When we talked about tznius, we talked about God's tznius. Hashem is displaying modesty in hiding himself away, right? And having us seek him out. And so that is in a similar way, they are both doing that. Both Esther and God are doing that in the Purim story. Okay. Now the Maharal points out further in relation to this idea of Esther being modest, that he says that it's a very interesting thing that in the verse tells us that her servants had to tell her that the Jews were in mourning, right? She doesn't understand what's going on. She sees that Mordechai, she's told that Mordechai is ripping his clothes and is wearing ashes and he's crying in the streets. And she's told that her servants come and tell her that everything is confusion. There's this edict, this decree against the Jews. It's really bad. So the Maharal points out that the fact that she didn't know it is another indication of her modesty, because she was so cut off from the rest of the world that she had to be told about these events. She was really very aloof from what was going on outside the palace. Okay, now, in addition, there is a connection we talked about her foremother, Rachel. We talked very much about how there is a connection between Rachel and Esther. I'm just going to say it again, review that idea. Rachel was the foremother of both Esther and Mordechai, who we're told is from the Shevet, the tribe of Benjamin. Okay. Now, there is a connection, first of all, in terms of beauty. Both of them are called beautiful. This exact same language is used to describe Esther and Rachel. They're both Yifas Toar v'Tovas Mara, beautiful of form and appearance. Okay. That's one thing that connects them. But then, of course, the deeper connection is this trait of modesty coming out in speech and silence, the ability to hide a secret. Of course, the situation with Rachel, as we know, had to do with her sister Leah. The character trait of not revealing anything that shouldn't be revealed. Rachel was the one to start this whole trend, right? She didn't give any indication to Yaakov, that Rachel was not going to be the one to marry him that evening or right at their wedding. Rather, it was going to be her sister. She kept that information to herself to save her sister Leah from embarrassment. And this is, here's what the Midrash says. Rachel excelled in the art of silence, and so did all her descendants. Hide information. Binyamin, as we talked about, Binyamin knew about the sale of Yosef and did not tell his father Yaakov. And Shaul, King Saul, also inherited. He was also from the tribe of Benjamin, so he was also a descendant of Rachel. And it says about him, in the matter of the coronation of the kingship, he did not tell. And Esther, of course, again, the Midrash goes on to connect Esther. Esther did not tell of her birthplace or her nation. So the Midrash makes this connection between Rachel, her son Benjamin, her descendant Shaul, and then his descendant Esther, as all having this trait of privacy, secrecy, knowing when to be quiet and knowing when to speak out. And of course, we do know that Esther eventually does speak out. So it's not a matter of fear, it's not a matter of shyness, it's not a matter of anything else, just knowing the right time to speak and knowing the right time to keep quiet. Okay. There is actually a hint to this familial connection to Rachel's silence in the fact that the Megillah says, the verse says twice that she kept silent as Mordechai instructed her to. It says she did not reveal her lineage and nation. Okay, Ein Esther Mageres Moladata Es V'Yasama Kasher Tziva Alaha Mordechai V'Yas Marmar Mordechai. Okay, it says twice. Now we know the sages love to delve deeply into the verses. Whenever something is, the words are significant. In this case, divinely inspired, right? They come divinely inspired. And so therefore there's significance in any extra word. And in this case, we have a whole extra phrase. Twice it says she did not reveal her lineage and her family, right? Okay. So what's the significance? The Malbim says that despite the fact that she was no longer under Mordechai's direct influence, and despite the many tactics of the king was curious as anything as well. He kept bothering her. Come on, tell me, where are you from? Where are you from? She still refused to identify her people. The Midrash says that, again, that this is a trait learned from Rachel, and the Midrash is therefore teaching that it was due to Esther's lineage, the fact that she came from Rachel, That's why it stresses it twice, her family. Because of her lineage, she had this innate quality of tznius. And again, so that's why it says it twice. It's praising Esther's relative, it's praising where she comes from, that she was being silent. She knew enough, she knew when to speak and when to be silent. So the fact that it says it twice is an indication that her lineage is being praised. It's the connection that's why. Why was she so quiet? Because she came from Rachel, because she came from this tribe. She inherited that quality. Okay. Now let's talk about a little bit more about her tznius in terms of her beauty, because as we mentioned, she was a great beauty, and again, while she was supposedly chosen as a queen because of her external beauty, the commentators say she was quite miraculous. She was found to be attractive. She had this physical appearance that was very unflattering. First of all, as we said, she had a greenish pallor. But also, there's another connection that's made to her looks through the hadash, through the myrtle, which is that it's a tree of average height. And she was also of average height. She was no great beauty. We can learn an interesting lesson of the value of what we consider the value of beauty through Esther, and also, interestingly, through the contrast between her and Vashti. Because Vashti was also a great beauty. Okay, in fact, she was such a great beauty that she loved parading herself around without any clothes on whenever her husband wanted her to, in order to show how beautiful she was. She and Vashti, in a sense, almost represents like, the Vashti we see in the Megillah is a very modern day woman in a certain sense. She's strong, she's attractive, she's fearless, she's bold. She doesn't mind showing herself off. But the difference is she's self-oriented, right? She considers herself beautiful, but that's about it. She values herself for her looks. And we know this is true because the moment that something happens to her outward beauty, like in the Gemara, we're told what happened. Why did she refuse Achashverosh? She had no problem doing it before. Why, when he called her in the beginning, the opening parak of the Megillah, he calls her. Why does she refuse to come? And the Medrash tells us that she developed a rash and a tail. She grew a tail. So, and now, keep in mind, refusing to come to the king when he calls is instant death. She had to know she would be punished, right? So, but she was so vain about her looks that she couldn't stomach the idea of anyone seeing her in a less than perfect form, and that's why she didn't come. Okay, the Gemara also talks about why. Of course, this was a heaven-sent incident that she grew ugly, as it were. So again, in contrast to Esther, while she's described as beautiful, we know that her appearance was probably less than attractive, her physical appearance, but that she had this thread of grace, this chen, that shone through from the inside to the outside, that everybody loved her, everybody adored her. They all saw her as this beautiful, beautiful creature. Okay. She herself does not value her beauty. In fact, when she goes to the beauty pageant that is the search for the new queen, she doesn't ask for any other, any extra accoutrements. No jewelry, no makeup. Everybody else is getting perfumes and makeup and being pampered. Esther refuses all of it. Clearly, obviously, she did not want to be queen anyway, but she doesn't consider her beauty, her physical attributes, anything to rely on in terms of, it's not something that she values in and of itself, right? We're taught this idea that the beautiful comes through from the inside is one of the main themes of Eishes Chayil, which we will talk about. This is the prayer that we sing right before we make Kiddush on Friday night, Eishes Chayil, the woman of valor, right? In there we're told grace and beauty are false. It is the woman who has offered her creator that is blessed and as beautiful. We see the woman described in Eishes Chayil, the woman of valor, is someone whose beauty comes from her deeds and her actions and shines through. And of course that is, again, Esther's Esther's attributes as well. Now, lest you think that her beauty, that her modesty meant that she was passive. Okay, remember the miracle comes through her, right? In fact, Lubavitcher Rebbe said a very interesting thing. Lubavitcher Rebbe said that why is Megillah called Esther? It could easily have been called Mordechai as well, right? He had just as much of a hand, really. When you think about it, he had just as much of a hand in the miracle. He's the one that tells Esther, go to the king. He's the one that rallies the Jews together to fast and pray on Esther's behalf, so that when she's doing what she has to do in the palace, approaching the king for permission to invite them to a party, and all of that's going on in the palace, she's really being backed up spiritually, in a spiritual sense, by the repentance that the Jews are doing, and that's up to Mordechai. That's in a sense, that has that, the prayer and the fasting, that all has as much weight, if not more, in terms of the ultimate outcome of the Purim story, as what Esther is doing in the palace by herself. So in a way, you could say that the story could have easily been called Megillas Mordechai. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says that Esther herself requested that it should be called Megillas Esther as a message for women, to tell women the important thing is action, and women, in all, as we mentioned many times before, women have the strength, the ability, the power, the responsibility to act. The Jewish nation, in other words, depends on women, and that was what Esther, was trying to send out the message to women, the Jewish women. Right? Her uncle, again, Mordechai, was the head of the Sanhedrin. He was the leader of the Jews at the time. Right? He was the greatest man of his generation. She could have relied on his prayers. She could have said to him, Mordechai, you do your stuff, and I'm just going to go on doing what I have to do. No, but she knew she had to take action. She knew she had to approach the king, which was almost, again, certain death, that she told Mordechai. To approach the king without being asked for is certain death. And she realizes, this is what I got to do. And so, in a way, she's saying the message is to women, it's up to you. All right? It's not enough to rely on men to do their learning. You have to be the active participants in the religion. So it was sort of like an encouragement, if you will. Okay. Now, there's another interesting little note here about her names. According to Kabbalah, each of her names corresponds to a different spiritual level. Hadassah, as we said, represents righteousness. That's because of the connection to righteous men being compared to plants, and righteous men being compared to something sweet-smelling. As such, according to Kabbalah, it corresponds to the heavenly sphere, representing God's infinity. Okay? The name Esther is a little bit of the opposite. As we said, it means hidden, and it derives from the Hebrew word hester, which means hiddenness. And this corresponds to the spiritual plane representing hidden godliness. And she's referred to both names, and the Kabbalah says, according to Chabad philosophy, that calling her by both names represents the fact that she brought godliness down into the world. She was able to take that upper infinity, right? That godliness, the element of godliness that is infinite and all powerful, and bring it down into the world, where again it was hidden in a sort of contradictory sense. It was active but hidden at the same time. A little bit of a contradictory thing. He was concealed, of course, but she brought that down into the world through her actions. Okay. Now, something interesting about Esther that the Gemara says, the Midrash compares Esther to the hind of the dawn, based on Psalms. It says, for the leader on Ayelet HaShachar, literally the hind of the dawn, which the rabbis apply to Esther. She's compared to a hind because it is desirable to her mate at all times. And so, the Gemara tells us, Esther was desirable to Achashverosh at all times. And she's compared to the dawn because the dawn comes at the end of a great darkness, right? Right before the dawn comes is the darkest part of night, we're told. And so, too, Esther, in other words, the miraculous delivery of the Jews came right after a period of absolutely no miracles and during a period of exile and darkness for the Jews. Again, bringing in the idea that the Purim story happens in a time when God is not visible. Now, there's a connection from Esther to her foremother. We talked about a connection to Rachel. There's also a connection to Sarah. Very interesting connection. The link between Esther and Sarah actually begins with the very first sentence in the Megillah. The very first sentence in the Megillah says, Achashverosh ruled over 127 provinces. Now, what's the link to 127 to Esther? So that the number 127 also appears in relation to Sarah, as well. Anyone know what the link? How we see 127 regarding Sarah?
Right.
Yes, very good. When she dies, the Torah tells us she was 127 years old. So, what's the connection? So, Rabbi Akiva can explain this connection because there's a story told about Rabbi Akiva where he used this connection to wake his students up. It says that he was lecturing to his students and he noticed that they were drowsing off. It was maybe nap time in the yeshiva. They were drowsing off. And in order to rouse them, he said in a loud voice, why was it seen fit that Esther should rule over 127 provinces? Right? We know that Achashverosh had 127 provinces, so Esther was the queen over all of those. Because thus said God, let the daughter of Sarah, who lived 127 years, come and reign over 127 provinces. Meaning, he was trying to impress on the students the importance of time. In other words, why did Esther merit ruling over 127 provinces? Because Sarah, and she used all her years. She didn't waste a day of her years. She didn't waste a year. She used them wisely. So in merit of the fact that she used her years well and accomplished and did mitzvos with them, therefore her descendant Esther was meriting to have 127 provinces. She actualized every moment of her life, Sarah did. Okay, and therefore because her years were so complete and perfect, the empire of Achashverosh was so large, and of course Esther was so large as well. Okay, and that was the message that Rabbi Akiva was trying to get to his students was, wake up, use your minutes well. So that's the connection that he was trying to make there. Wake up, and then they apparently did wake up and start paying attention to their class. We have to talk a little bit about Esther's situation. It's really, we're not told much. We're told the bare bones of the story, what happened. But if we really think about what she went through, it was quite a difficult situation. We hinted to that a little bit, the fact that she had to practice her religion in secret. So think about Esther. She's born an orphan. Her father died when her mother was pregnant with her, and her mother died in childbirth. So she was born an orphan. Right? She's then taken in by her uncle Mordechai or cousin Mordechai, and he raises her. All right. She's married to him, according to the Midrashim. She may be married to him. She was hidden away for 4 years when Achashverosh's goons started knocking on the doors and said, we need all the eligible ladies of the kingdom, or forget eligible, just all the ladies. All the women have to come, all the girls have to come. She was hiding. She was in hiding for 4 years. She was able to hide herself away and not be called, but eventually, somehow, they got her. So she's torn away from her either father, uncle, or husband. She is forced to live in the palace for a year, in the harem, basically. She is forced to submit herself to Achashverosh, because that was the process, the process by which he chose a queen, is that each girl would come to him in the evening and leave in the morning. Yeah. So can imagine, you're subjected to that, for a year. And then you're chosen to be queen. She didn't want to be queen. She's chosen to be queen. Mordechai says, don't tell anybody your nationality. And for 9 years, she's on her own in the palace, She's hiding herself away. She can't tell anybody she's Jewish. She can't have any face-to-face with Mordechai. She communicates with him through notes, through her servants. They send notes to each other. That's it, And the Talmud tells us that the Psalm 22 that we dedicated to her, that it says dedicated to her, the words of that psalm continue to say, my Lord, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me despite my cries? This they attribute to Esther's position. She really, again, of course, she had nevuah. She was a neviah. She was a prophetess. So she had divine prophecy, but she's all alone. She doesn't have the benefit of any sort of guide. Mordechai is not with her, as we said. I cry in the daytime, but you do not respond. In the night I have no rest, but you are holy, enthroned in the praise of it. So the Midrash expands on this idea, and they delve into it and say, what was Esther, what was she feeling at this point? And they say, the Midrash says, my Lord, why have you forsaken me? My Lord, at the splitting of the sea, my Lord, at Sinai, why have you forsaken me? Why is the order of the world changed concerning me? The order of the mothers. With regard to our mother Sarah, she was held captive by Pharaoh one night, and his whole household were struck by a plague. But I have been placed in the bosom of this wicked man all these years. For me you do no miracles. My Lord, why have you forsaken me? So they basically give a voice to Esther, the sages in the Gemara, and come up with this plea that she's asking God to help her. She says, my foremother Sarah, when she was taken by the Pharaoh, you sent a plague to kill his entire. But here I am for 9 years. There's no sign of you. There's nothing. Right? Remember, it was a time when God was hidden. There's no miracles. She's on her own. She really has to act alone. The Maharal says that this, again, going back to this idea of crushing the myrtle, right? Maharal says this person who was chosen to do this work, it wasn't an accident that she had a life of alienation and loneliness. It was from that place of emptiness that Esther was able to, she was forced to seek out God, right? She had to come to him, she had to find him, she had to look for him. She had to walk through the dark to find him. She was all alone. She didn't have the benefit of open miracles, obviously. There were no plagues. But once she decides to do what she has to do, she decides she's going to risk her life, right? She's going to risk her life. She's going to approach the king unbidden. This is, again, as she tells Mordechai, this is pretty certain death for me. How can I go? And she even doesn't want to do it. Mordechai tells her, go to the king now. This is the time. This is the moment. This is your time. And she says, I can't go to the king unbidden. It's certain death. And he says, this is the time you have to act. This was the moment. Who knows, he says to her, who knows if this was not the moment you were put in the palace for. Right? This might be the reason that you became queen. Right? Again, hard for them to see it. It's not an obvious thing. It's not, he's saying, look, I don't know, maybe this is the time. This is the time you were chosen. This is the reason you were chosen. Clearly this was all God's hand, and he's leading you to this action, right? So she fasts for 3 days and 3 nights. She tells Mordechai, gather the Jews to do the same. On my behalf, let's all repent. This is clearly, something we have to petition God about. We can't just rely on the miracle. We have to show God that we are worthy of a miracle. We have to repent of the sins that we've done. Now remember, she did have prophecy, but as she entered the king's palace, the room where he was, the house of the idols where he was, prophecy left her. So now she's really all alone, okay? She has absolutely no sense that God is with her. The Talmud, the Gemara says in Megillah, Rabbi Levi said, as Esther approached the house of idols, the presence of God left her. She said, oh God, why have you left me? And that's when we connect the psalm to her. Could it be, she's continuing to speak through the Gemara, could it be that you judge me as premeditated and willing instead of as one who is coerced to transgress? So we have to understand what's going on here. She's in complete darkness. She doesn't feel God anymore. She doesn't have a clue whether what she's doing is approved or not. She doesn't know. She has no prophecy anymore. She physically, too, remember what she looks like. She already has a green pallor, and she's been fasting for 3 days and 3 nights. She doesn't look her best. So she's terrified. The king has to really, overcome a lot in order to invite her into the house. She's risking her life. She knows that she's convinced that this moment requires a miracle. So she doesn't wait around. She goes anyway. Okay. Now, we have to explain what the danger to her was. Okay. The Gemara explains this a little bit more. The sages look at what exactly was going on. So we already talked about the physical danger she was in. She was in danger of losing her life, and then she wouldn't be able to help the Jews anyway, right? She prepares herself spiritually. Okay, however, here's the problem. When she is approaching the king, King Achashverosh, it is with the plans of seducing him. Because she knows that one of the ways to get on his good side would be to seduce King Achashverosh. Okay? Once she does that, once she is actively offering to do that action of seduction, she puts herself in a very, very bad place spiritually. Why? Up to this point, it says that Esther was, right, we mentioned that she was subjected to the king. In fact, halachically speaking, she's looked at as a victim for 9 years. For all the 9 years that she's been in the palace, she has been subjected to King Achashverosh. In that sense, she's a victim, right? Because she would be, she'd be risking her life if she would say no, right? So she's allowed to subject herself to what is looked at as an act of rape, right? Halachically speaking, she's blameless for all of those 9 years. All right? However, now, with what she's planning to do, she's now taking an active role in seduction. She's now changing her status halachically. She's changing her status halachically. She's no longer an innocent, unwilling victim. She is now the seductress. So when she's forced to play this role of courtesan, she can no longer be considered innocent. This has ramifications of changing her status completely, right? She was passive, she's no longer passive. Interestingly enough, the Gemara tells us that this passivity that she had had up to now, Achashverosh kind of liked it. He saw it as aloofness, coldness, and that reminded him of Vashti. Vashti, by the way, was the granddaughter of a king. She was herself a royal person, as most royal, marriages are made between royal houses. She was part of a royal house. So she had this aloofness that Achashverosh kind of got used to, I guess, or enjoyed. And Esther's passivity, he understood, he took to mean to be that same sort of regality, okay? The moment, however, that Esther takes action by entering the king's chamber willingly, her status is changed, which means basically what? That she is actively and willingly sinning, right? So now we come back to the verse. The verse says, go, she tells Mordechai, go, gather all the Jews together who are present in Shushan and fast for me. Neither will I eat or drink for 3 days. I also and my girls will fast likewise, and so will I go to the king, though it is against the law. And then she says, the kasher avadati, and if I am lost, then I will be lost. Okay. So the Gemara looks at this double language again. If I'm lost, if I am lost. What does that mean? It means that just as I will be lost to my father's house, I will be lost to you, Mordechai. Meaning, up until now, she was, again going with the explanation that she's Mordechai's wife, up until now, they could have resumed marital relations because she's a victim of rape, right? The moment she chooses to act, she's no longer a passive victim. She's an active participant. And then, therefore, she is now no longer allowed to her husband. She's going to have to be separated from her husband. So that's the double meaning there. Just like I may be killed, I will also be lost to you. I'm going to be lost to you. I'm not going to be able to, I'll be separated from you. Okay. Another way to understand this double language is, just as I am lost in this world, in other words, I'll lose my life, so I will be lost in the next life. I'm going to lose my portion in the world to come. Because what she's doing, guys, is so serious nature. It's one of the mitzvos that we're told that we have to rather be killed than commit, right? Yaharog v'al yavar. We have to rather allow ourselves to be killed rather than transgress this. And this is one of those mitzvos. She's actively, right, doing something that's going to cut her off not only from her people, from her life, but also she fears from the world to come. And that's also another meaning of the double meaning of if I'm lost, I'm lost. So it's fraught with danger, this action that she's doing, right? Okay. So then it says that the verse, it tells us, so came on the third day, she puts on royal dress, and she stood in the inner court of the king's palace, opposite the king, and the king sat on his royal throne, opposite the gate of the house. That's what the verse tells us. And the Zohar comes in at this point. The Zohar sees something really interesting here. The Zohar makes the comparison. We've heard before the idea that Yom Kippur is compared to Purim. Purim is compared to Yom Kippur. The Zohar makes the comparison through Esther. And the Zohar says, lest you think that she's entering the inner chamber to conduct herself in a sordid manner, right? Don't think that. The Zohar says Esther's putting on the royal garb compares her, is just like the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, dressing in the priestly garments on Yom Kippur. She enters the inner chamber of the king in the state of mind, again, and in the sense of sacrificing herself for the Jewish people, very much in the same way that the Kohen Gadol is dressing in his royal clothes and entering the Holy of Holies, which he entered only on that day, and he also risked his life. Every time he entered, he risked his life. And so they compare Esther dressing herself in the clothing of royalty, meaning the clothing of spiritual royalty. She was at this point at the height of her spiritual powers, right? Which is an interesting thing. And in addition, she was a physical manifestation of spiritual beauty. There's a passage from the Zohar that talks about how Esther was dressed, and that the actual clothing that she put on wasn't really just physical clothing, that it was actually the manifestation of all the spiritual perfection that she had with her at that point. The question is posed in the Zohar: is there anything on earth that is similar to the idea of a spiritual light that is generated by mitzvos that we perform? Because we have the concept that every time we perform a mitzvah, it becomes an angelic manifestation, a spiritual manifestation, a light, as it were. There's an energy that is created when we perform a mitzvah. So the question in the Zohar is, was there anything ever comparable to this spiritual light here on earth? And the answer is yes, Esther, when she was dressed in her royal clothes. When she was dressed in the royal clothes, she was bringing down the atmosphere of the higher realm, the spiritual realm. She brought down that atmosphere. She had purified and refined her body. She had purified and refined her neshama, her soul. And she was, therefore, so beautiful that, as the verse tells us, Achashverosh had no choice but to extend the scepter to her and allow her entrance. She was just, again, going back to that idea that her beauty came from the spiritual elements in her, the chen, the grace, whatever that spiritual beauty was, it emanated through her and made him, he had no choice at that point but to find that she was beautiful and to extend that scepter to her. So, as we see, it was quite more complicated than just what the pshat, the verses will tell us. She went through an awful lot, and she sacrificed an awful lot. And I think that, from that perspective, clearly the Megillah is well named. Yeah. Any questions?
Fantastic.
Questions? Discussion? All right.